Hey everyone, welcome back to another night of Minecraft and Reddit chaos. We're building, we're mining, and we're diving into some stories that'll make you question everything you thought you knew about trust. Tonight's lineup is absolutely unhinged, and I'm here for every second of it. Before we dive in, I just want to take a moment to thank everyone who's been watching and sharing their feedback in the comments. It really means a lot that you take the time to write and let me know you're enjoying this kind of content. I read every comment, and I truly appreciate the support. I'll keep doing my best to help you relax and unwind while we dive into some of the craziest Reddit drama out there. We've got some diverse stories lined up tonight, each one messier than the last. Poisonings caught on camera, cheating exposed by a dog's GPS, family secrets detonating at funerals, and workplace betrayals that'll make your blood boil. Imagine trusting your roommate completely, only to discover they've been slowly ending your life one cup of coffee at a time. Yeah, it gets dark fast. Let's get into it. So I moved in with Sarah about 3 months after landing my dream job in the city. She seemed perfect, honestly. Clean, quiet, worked from home as a graphic designer, and she baked these incredible lemon scones every Sunday morning. The apartment was beautiful, rent was reasonable, and after weeks of looking at overpriced shoebox studios with suspicious stains, finding her felt like winning the lottery. We clicked immediately. She even helped me unpack and set up my bedroom furniture without me asking. I remember thinking I'd finally gotten lucky for once. Then, about 2 weeks in, I started feeling off. Nothing dramatic at first, just this persistent nausea that wouldn't quit. I chalked it up to adjusting to the new commute and the stress of proving myself at work. My boss was intense, the team was competitive, and I was pulling long hours trying to make a good impression. Sarah was so understanding about it. She'd leave these sweet notes on the counter like, "Hope your day gets better," with a smiley face, and she started making me herbal tea in the mornings. Chamomile, she said, for my nerves. I was grateful. It felt like having a big sister looking out for me. But the nausea got worse. I'd wake up dizzy, stumble to the bathroom, and spend 20 minutes hunched over the toilet before work. My coworkers started commenting on how pale I looked. I went to my doctor, who ran some blood tests and found nothing alarming. She suggested it might be anxiety related to the job change and prescribed me some anti-nausea medication. I took it religiously, but it barely touched the problem. Sarah was constantly checking on me, asking how I felt, offering to make me soup or smoothies. She said she'd been through something similar a few years back and that vitamin-rich smoothies had saved her life. So I started drinking those too. Spinach, banana, some protein powder. They tasted fine. I wanted to believe they were helping. By month 2, I wasn't just nauseous anymore. I was losing weight rapidly, dropping pounds I didn't have to spare. My hair started falling out in the shower, clumps of it swirling down the drain. I'd find strands all over my pillow in the morning. That's when the panic really set in. I went back to the doctor who referred me to a specialist. They ran more tests, checked my thyroid, tested for autoimmune disorders, even did an MRI to rule out anything neurological. Everything came back inconclusive. The specialist suggested stress again, maybe even early signs of burnout. He recommended therapy and cutting back on work hours. I tried, I really did. But nothing changed. If anything, I felt worse. Sarah was a saint through all of it. She'd sit with me on the couch when I was too weak to do anything else, rubbing my back and telling me everything would be okay. She started cooking all my meals because I was too exhausted to stand at the stove. She'd bring me breakfast in bed, insisting I needed to keep my strength up. I felt like such a burden, but she kept saying it was no problem at all. She seemed genuinely concerned. Looking back now, I realize how perfect her act was. She played the role of devoted friend so convincingly that I never once questioned her. By month 3, I'd lost 20 pounds. I couldn't keep up at work anymore. My boss pulled me aside and gently suggested I take medical leave until I figured out what was going on. I agreed, too exhausted to fight it. That's when my best friend Maya came to visit. She hadn't seen me in person for a while, and when she walked through the door, her face went white. She pulled me into the bedroom and asked point blank if I was dying. I told her I didn't know. She started crying, and then she started asking questions, lots of questions, about my symptoms, about what the doctors said, about my living situation. When I mentioned how helpful Sarah had been, Maya's expression shifted. She got quiet, too quiet. Then she said something that sounded insane at the time. She asked if I'd ever considered that someone might be making me sick on purpose. I laughed it off. That was ridiculous. Sarah was the only person taking care of me. But Maya didn't laugh. She told me about a true crime podcast she'd listened to about poisoning cases, how the symptoms I was describing matched antifreeze or heavy metal poisoning, and how often the perpetrator was someone close who played the caregiver role. I thought she was being paranoid, but she wouldn't let it go. She begged me to set up a hidden camera, just to rule it out. She even offered to buy one for me. I didn't want to believe it. But Maya's fear was contagious, and honestly, I was desperate. Nothing else was working. So when Sarah left for her Wednesday evening yoga class, Maya and I set up a tiny nanny cam in the kitchen, tucked behind the coffee maker, where it had a clear view of the counter. It felt ridiculous and invasive, like I was betraying Sarah's kindness. But Maya insisted we just watch the footage for a few days, and if nothing happened, we'd take it down and never speak of it again. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about the camera, about how absurd this whole thing was. But the next morning, after Sarah left for a coffee run, Maya and I pulled up the footage on my laptop. We fast-forwarded through hours of nothing. Sarah cooking dinner, washing dishes, scrolling on her phone, normal roommate stuff. I was about to tell Maya this was a waste of time when we saw it. Sarah walked into the kitchen at 6 in the morning, right before I usually woke up. She opened the cabinet where we kept the mugs and pulled mine down, the blue one with the chipped handle. Then she reached into her purse and pulled out a small brown bottle with no label. She unscrewed the cap, tilted it over my mug, and let 3 drops fall in. Then she made my coffee like normal, added cream and sugar the way I liked it, and set it on the counter. She even arranged a napkin next to it. Then she walked away like nothing happened. Maya and I stared at the screen in complete silence. I felt like I was going to throw up. My hands were shaking so hard I could barely hold the laptop. Maya was already on her phone, talking about calling the police, but I couldn't move. I just kept replaying the footage, watching Sarah poison me in my own kitchen, watching her smile as she stirred the coffee, watching her hum to herself like she was doing something kind. This is where patience turned into survival mode. I told Maya we needed more evidence. One video might not be enough. The police would need a pattern, proof that this wasn't a one-time thing. So for the next week, I pretended everything was normal. I drank the coffee Sarah made me, but I'd dump it in the sink when she wasn't looking and rinse the mug immediately. I forced myself to eat the meals she prepared, but I'd spit the food into napkins and throw it away later. It was the hardest week of my life. Every time she handed me something, my skin crawled. But I smiled. I thanked her. I played the grateful sick roommate while the camera captured everything, and she did it every single day. Sometimes it was the coffee, sometimes it was the smoothies. Once I watched her stir something into my soup while it was heating on the stove. She was meticulous. She'd wait until I was in the shower or on a phone call, then she'd spike whatever I was about to consume. She never rushed. She was calm, methodical, almost casual about it. Watching the footage felt like watching a horror movie where I was the victim. After 7 days, I had everything I needed. Maya and I went to the police station with the camera, the footage, and a timeline of my symptoms. They took it seriously, thank God. They sent an officer back to the apartment with me to retrieve the brown bottle from Sarah's purse. She wasn't home, so they got a warrant. When they tested the contents, it came back as a mixture of antifreeze and arsenic, enough to kill me slowly over time without raising immediate red flags. The detective told me I was incredibly lucky to be alive. They arrested Sarah that evening when she came home from a grocery run. I wasn't there. I was staying with Maya, too terrified to be in that apartment. But the detective called me later and told me everything. Apparently, Sarah didn't even try to deny it at first. She seemed almost proud. When they asked her why, she said she'd found paperwork in my room a month in. Documents about a trust fund I'd inherited from my grandmother. It wasn't even that much, maybe $60,000, but she'd convinced herself that if I died and she was my closest friend and caregiver, she'd have a claim to it, and she wanted the apartment lease too. I was on a month-to-month, but she wasn't. She thought if I was gone, she could take over the lease and stay in that beautiful rent-controlled apartment forever. The thing that still haunts me is how calculated it was. She researched poisoning methods. She knew exactly how much to use, so I'd get sicker gradually, not all at once. She wanted to play nurse, to be the hero who stayed by my side until the end, so no one would ever suspect her. She told the police she'd been planning it for weeks before she even started. She'd watched me, studied my routines, figured out the perfect way to do it, and she almost succeeded. If you've made it this far into the chaos, you're as addicted to Reddit drama as I am. Make sure to subscribe and tell me where you are watching from, because this next story is about to get even wilder. Sarah was sentenced to 12 years for attempted murder. The judge called her actions premeditated and cruel. She showed no remorse during the trial. She just sat there stone-faced, occasionally glancing at me like I'd betrayed her by surviving. Her lawyer tried to argue she had mental health issues, but the prosecution tore that apart with the evidence of planning and research. The jury deliberated for less than 3 hours. I spent the next 6 months recovering. The doctors said the arsenic had damaged my kidneys and liver, but with treatment and time, my body could heal. The hair loss reversed. The nausea finally stopped. I gained the weight back. Physically, I'm okay now. Mentally, that's a longer road. I'm in therapy twice a week. I have nightmares about her standing over me with that brown bottle. I don't trust easily anymore. I vet everyone obsessively, but I'm alive and that's something. Now I advocate for renters' rights and push for mandatory background checks for roommates. I've spoken at a few city council meetings about it. People don't realize how vulnerable you are when you live with a stranger. You're trusting them with your safety, your space, your life, and sometimes that trust gets weaponized. I also started a blog about my experience, and the number of people who've reached out with similar stories is horrifying. Poisoning isn't as rare as you'd think. It's just quiet. It's just slow, and that's what makes it so terrifying. I'll never forget Sarah's face when the police led her out in handcuffs. She looked at me one last time and said, "I really did make good scones though, didn't I?" Like that mattered. Like that would somehow redeem her. I didn't answer. I just watched her go. Speaking of trust being shattered in the most unexpected ways, wait until you hear how someone's pet became the ultimate relationship detective. Emma and I had been together for 2 years when we adopted Biscuit. He was this goofy golden retriever mix we found at a rescue event, all floppy ears and clumsy paws. Emma fell in love with him instantly, and honestly so did I. We both worked demanding jobs, me in software development and Emma in marketing. But we made it work. She'd gotten approval to work remotely full-time about 6 months before all this started, which seemed like a blessing at the time. It meant Biscuit would never be alone for long stretches, and Emma seemed happier not having to commute downtown every day. The GPS collar wasn't my idea initially. Biscuit had this habit of bolting whenever a door was left open, even for a second. He wasn't trying to run away. He just had zero impulse control and wanted to investigate every smell within a 5-mile radius. One afternoon, he squeezed past me while I was bringing in groceries and took off down the street. It took me 40 minutes to find him, and by then I was drenched in sweat and full of panic. Emma suggested we get one of those GPS collars just in case it happened again. Made sense. We ordered it that night, synced it to an app on both our phones, and forgot about it. Biscuit wore it every day, and it gave us peace of mind. Problem solved, or so I thought. Things were good between us. We had our routines. I'd leave for the office around 8. She'd work from home with Biscuit curled up under her desk, and we'd have dinner together most nights. She started taking Biscuit on these long midday walks, which I thought was great. She'd send me photos of him at different parks, tongue hanging out, looking thrilled. She'd caption them things like lunch break adventure or this guy needed to burn off energy. I loved seeing those messages pop up during my workday. It felt domestic and sweet, like we were building a real life together. But after a while I started noticing she seemed distant. Not in an obvious way, just small things. She'd be on her phone more than usual, smiling at the screen and then quickly locking it when I walked into the room. She started wearing nicer clothes even though she was working from home, doing her makeup more carefully. When I asked if she had video meetings, she'd say yes, but vaguely, never offering details. I didn't want to be that guy, the paranoid boyfriend who interrogates his girlfriend, so I let it slide. I trusted her. We'd never had issues with honesty before. Then, one afternoon, I was working from home because our office building lost power. I was sitting on the couch with my laptop when I got bored and opened the GPS app to see where Biscuit was on his walk. Just curiosity, really. I figured Emma had taken him to the park down the street like usual. But the little dot showing Biscuit's location wasn't at a park. It was at an address across town, at least a 40-minute drive from our apartment. I stared at the screen, confused. Maybe the app was glitching. I refreshed it. The dot stayed put. I told myself there was a logical explanation. Maybe she was visiting a friend and brought Biscuit along. Maybe she had a client meeting in that area. I didn't want to text her and sound accusatory, so I just watched the app. The dot stayed at that address for 2 hours. Then it started moving back toward home. By the time Emma walked through the door with Biscuit, I'd convinced myself I was overreacting. She greeted me cheerfully, asked why I was home early, and started making tea like everything was normal. I almost let it go, but that night, after she fell asleep, I couldn't stop thinking about it. I grabbed my phone and opened the GPS history feature on the app. I'd never looked at it before, didn't even know it existed until I started poking around. But there it was, a full timeline of everywhere Biscuit had been for the past 6 months. And what I saw made my stomach drop. 3 times a week, almost like clockwork, Biscuit went to that same address across town, always during Emma's supposed lunch break walks, always for 2 to 3 hours. I zoomed in on the map and street viewed the location. It was a fancy apartment complex with a gated entrance and a doorman. Not a park, not a dog-friendly cafe, not anywhere you'd casually take a dog for a walk. I scrolled back further in the history. This had been going on for nearly 8 months. 8 months of her driving Biscuit to the same place, spending hours there, and then coming home and acting like she'd just been at the neighborhood park. I didn't sleep that night. I just lay there next to her, staring at the ceiling, trying to make sense of it. Maybe she was dog sitting for someone. Maybe she had a friend who lived there and loved dogs. Maybe I was jumping to the worst possible conclusion. But deep down, I knew. I knew exactly what this was. The next morning, I told her I had to run errands. I waited until I saw on the app that Biscuit was heading to that address again. And then I got in my car and drove there. My hands were shaking the entire time. I parked across the street and watched the entrance. 20 minutes later, I saw her car pull into the garage. I waited. I didn't know what I was waiting for, honestly. Proof, I guess. Confirmation that I wasn't losing my mind. Then came the breaking point. I walked up to the building, told the doorman I was visiting a friend, and slipped past him when he got distracted by a delivery. I know, not my proudest moment. But I was running on adrenaline and heartbreak, and rational thinking wasn't in the driver's seat anymore. I pulled up the GPS app and watched Biscuit's dot. It was on the 4th floor. I took the elevator up, stepped into the hallway, and followed the signal until I was standing outside, apartment 412. I could hear Biscuit barking inside, that happy bark he does when he's excited. I stood there for a full minute debating whether to knock. Part of me wanted to turn around, go home, and pretend I'd never seen any of this. But I couldn't. I knocked. Footsteps. The door opened. A guy stood there, mid-30s, wearing sweatpants and a fitted t-shirt. He looked confused, then annoyed. Before he could say anything, Biscuit came bounding to the door, tail wagging, and jumped up on me. And then, from somewhere behind the guy, I heard Emma's voice. She said something like, "Who is it?" in this casual, comfortable tone that made my chest tighten. She came around the corner and froze. We locked eyes. Her face went white. The guy looked between us, clearly putting it together. There was this awful moment where nobody said anything. Biscuit was the only one acting normal, panting happily, oblivious to the fact that he'd just blown up my entire relationship. I didn't yell. I didn't make a scene. I just looked at her and said, "How long?" She opened her mouth, closed it, then opened it again. She stammered something about it not being what it looked like, which was almost funny given the circumstances. The guy, to his credit, looked genuinely uncomfortable. He muttered something about not knowing she had a boyfriend. Emma shot him a look that told me everything I needed to know. This wasn't new. This wasn't a mistake. This was a whole separate life she'd been living. I asked again. How long? She finally admitted it. 8 months. They'd met at a coffee shop near his apartment. He'd approached her while she was walking Biscuit. They'd exchanged numbers. It started as friendly conversations, then coffee dates, then more. She said she didn't mean for it to happen, that she still loved me, that it was complicated, all the greatest hits of cheating excuses. I didn't stick around to hear the rest. I just clipped the leash onto Biscuit's collar and walked out. The guy called after me. Turns out he had a wife. Emma had told him she was single. He asked me how long we'd been together. When I told him 2 years, he looked like he'd been punched. He said his wife traveled for work a lot, and he thought Emma was just someone he'd been casually seeing on the side. We were both idiots, apparently. I gave him my number and told him to call me if he wanted to compare notes. Then I left. I drove home with Biscuit in the passenger seat. He kept trying to lick my face, completely unbothered by the fact that he'd just destroyed my relationship. I couldn't even be mad at him. He was just a dog doing dog things. It wasn't his fault his GPS tracker turned out to be the most honest thing in my life. Emma tried calling me about 50 times that day. I didn't answer. She came home eventually, and I'd already packed her stuff into boxes by the door. She cried, she begged, she said it was over with him, that she'd made a horrible mistake, that we could work through this. I told her to leave. She kept saying she loved me. I told her that if she loved me, she wouldn't have spent 8 months driving our dog to another man's apartment and pretending everything was fine. She left. I kept Biscuit. That wasn't even a question. A few days later, the guy's wife called me. Turns out he'd confessed everything to her after I left, and she was filing for divorce. We met up for coffee, and it was one of the strangest conversations I've ever had. We swapped stories, realized Emma and her husband had both been lying to everyone involved, and bonded over the sheer absurdity of it all. She was kind, funny, and handling the situation with way more grace than I was. We stayed in touch after that, not in a romantic way, just as two people who got caught in the same mess and needed someone who understood. Emma kept texting me for weeks, apologizing, explaining, trying to get me to see her side. I blocked her eventually. I didn't need closure or answers. I'd already gotten everything I needed from a dog's GPS collar. Biscuit's doing great, by the way. He has no idea he's a home wrecker. He still gets excited about walks, still has zero impulse control, and still wears that GPS collar every single day. I check it sometimes just to see where he is in the apartment. It's comforting, in a weird way. At least I know he's not lying to me. Trust and deception seem to run deep in families too, and this next story proves blood doesn't always mean loyalty. Our family was the kind that actually looked forward to Thanksgiving. No drama, no tension, just good food and stupid jokes around the table. It was me, my brother Jake, our parents, and usually a handful of extended family members who'd rotate in and out depending on the year. We weren't perfect, but we were solid. Or at least I thought we were. Jake and I are 2 years apart. I'm the older one, he's the baby of the family, and we've always been close. Not in that obnoxious, we finish each other's sentences way, but we had each other's backs. We texted almost every day, grabbed beers on weekends, and could talk about anything. Our parents had been married for 32 years at that point, high school sweethearts who somehow made it work. They still held hands at the movies. They had inside jokes that made no sense to anyone else. They were disgustingly functional. Thanksgiving that year was at our parents' house like always. My cousin Becca showed up with a 23andMe kit she'd gotten on sale during some Black Friday pre-deal thing. She thought it would be funny to give it to Jake as a gag gift, because he was always joking about being adopted. He had red hair and freckles, and the rest of us were dark-haired and olive-skinned. So he'd spent his entire childhood claiming he was secretly Irish royalty or something. We all laughed when Becca handed it to him. My mum rolled her eyes and said something like, "Oh great, now we'll find out we're all related to Genghis Khan." Jake played along. He opened the kit right there at the table, read the instructions out loud in this ridiculous dramatic voice, and swabbed his cheek while my dad pretended to film it like a documentary. My mum was laughing so hard she had tears in her eyes. It felt like the most harmless, stupid thing in the world. Jake sealed the tube, stuck it in the prepaid envelope, and tossed it on the counter. He mailed it the next day. We forgot about it almost immediately. 3 weeks later, my phone rang at 11 at night. It was Jake. He sounded weird, like he'd been crying or maybe hyperventilating. I answered with some joke about him butt dialing me, but he cut me off. He said, "We need to talk right now, in person." I asked what was wrong. He wouldn't say. He just kept repeating that I needed to come over. I threw on a hoodie and drove to his apartment, my mind racing through every possible disaster. I thought maybe he'd gotten fired, or his girlfriend had dumped him, or he'd gotten some kind of bad medical news. When I got there, he looked like he'd been hit by a truck. His eyes were red, his hair was a mess, and he was pacing around his living room like a caged animal. He shoved his phone at me without saying a word. On the screen was his 23andMe results page. I didn't understand what I was looking at initially. Then I saw it. Under the DNA relatives section, my name was listed. But instead of showing us as full siblings, it said we shared 25% DNA. Half siblings. I stared at the screen, trying to process it. I said something like, "This has to be a mistake. These tests screw up all the time." But Jake just shook his head. He scrolled down and showed me another match. A man named Michael R., listed as his biological father, not our dad, some stranger. Jake had already clicked on the guy's profile. There was a photo, middle-aged, red hair, freckles. He looked like an older version of Jake. It was undeniable. I felt like the floor had disappeared underneath me. I asked Jake if he'd contacted the guy. He said no, he didn't know what to do. He didn't know if this was real or some kind of error. I told him I'd take the test too. We needed more information before we did anything, so I ordered a kit that night, paid for expedited processing, and spent the next 2 weeks in this weird liminal space where I didn't know if my entire life was a lie or if we were overreacting. My results came back. I pulled them up on my phone, sitting in my car outside my apartment because I couldn't bring myself to look inside. I opened the DNA relatives section. Jake was listed as my half-sibling, 25% shared DNA, and there, listed as my biological father, was a man named Paul S. I clicked on his profile. It was my dad's best friend, Paul, the guy who came to every birthday party, every backyard barbecue, every major holiday. Paul, who'd been in my life since I was born. Paul, who I called Uncle Paul, even though we weren't related. Except, apparently, we were. I sat in that car for an hour, staring at the screen, trying to figure out how this was possible. My mum cheated. That was the only explanation. But then why did Jake have a different father too? Did they both cheat? On each other? How does that even happen? I called Jake and told him. He went silent for a long time, and then he said we needed to confront them. Together. Before Christmas, because he couldn't sit through another holiday pretending everything was fine. And here's where it gets absurd. We asked our parents to meet us at their house the following Saturday. We didn't tell them why, just said it was important. When we walked in, they were sitting on the couch looking concerned but not panicked. My mum offered us coffee. My dad asked if everything was okay. Jake didn't waste time. He pulled out his phone, showed them the DNA results, and said, "Explain this." The room went so quiet I could hear the clock ticking in the kitchen. My mum's face crumbled. She started crying immediately, these horrible choking sobs, and my dad just sat there, staring at the phone like it was written in a language he didn't understand. I thought he was going to deny it, or get angry, or demand to see more proof, but he didn't. He just looked at my mum and said so quietly I almost didn't hear him, "They know." My mum couldn't speak. She was just crying, shaking her head, covering her face with her hands. So my dad started talking, and what he said next rewrote my entire understanding of my family. He told us he'd been sterile since he was 12. Some childhood illness, I don't even remember the details because I was too busy trying not to pass out. He'd known since before he and my mum got married. He told her before they even got engaged. She'd been devastated because she wanted kids, and he'd said they could adopt or use a donor. But she didn't want that. She wanted biological children, so they came up with a different arrangement. They stayed together. They loved each other, he insisted. They really did. But they agreed she could have affairs if she wanted to get pregnant. It wasn't cheating, he said. It was an agreement. She got involved with Michael, the neighbor from their old house. That's how Jake happened. Then she ended things with Michael, and a few years later, when they wanted another kid, she got involved with Paul. That's how I happened. Both men knew. Both men agreed to step back and let my dad raise us as his own. I couldn't breathe. Jake was yelling, asking why they lied, why they didn't just tell us the truth. My mum finally managed to speak. She said they wanted us to have a normal childhood, that they didn't want us to feel confused or different, that they thought it was the right thing to do. My dad said they planned to tell us eventually, when we were older, but the years kept passing and it never felt like the right time. Then my mom dropped another bomb. She said it wasn't just her. My dad had affairs too, with their permission. She said they had an open marriage, that they stayed together for us, but lived separate emotional lives. She named a couple of women I vaguely remembered from childhood. Friends of the family, women who'd been around a lot when I was a kid, and then just sort of disappeared. Things went from bad to unhinged. Jake lost it. He started shouting about how messed up this was, how they'd built our entire lives on lies, how we deserved to know the truth. I couldn't even yell. I just sat there feeling numb. My dad tried to defend their choices. He said they did what they thought was best, that they loved us more than anything, that biology didn't matter. But it did matter. It mattered so much, because every memory I had was now tainted. Every family photo, every holiday, every moment I thought was real was actually just a performance. I asked if Michael and Paul knew about each other. My dad said yes. They all knew. It was this weird agreement between four adults who decided that keeping up appearances was more important than honesty. I felt sick. Jake asked if we had other siblings out there. My mom said no, just us, just this one incredibly complicated mess. We left that night without saying goodbye. Jake and I sat in my car outside their house for an hour, not talking, just existing in this new horrible reality. Eventually, he said he didn't think he could forgive them. I said I didn't know if I could either. The fallout was nuclear. My parents tried to call us for days. We didn't answer. They sent long emails trying to explain, trying to justify, trying to make us understand. It didn't help. Jake told them he wanted nothing to do with Michael, that he didn't care if the guy was his biological father. He didn't want a relationship. I reached out to Paul. We met for coffee. It was the most awkward conversation of my life. He apologized, said he'd always wanted to be part of my life, but respected my dad's role. I didn't know how to feel about that. I still don't. My parents announced their divorce 2 months later. Once the truth was out, there was no point in staying together anymore. The thing that held them together, the lie, was gone. My mom moved to a different state. My dad stayed in the house. We're in therapy now, Jake and I, trying to process 3 decades of deception. Some days are better than others. Thanksgiving doesn't happen at their house anymore. We do Friendsgiving now, just Jake and me and a few people we actually trust. No family, no parents, no biological fathers who pretended to be uncles, just people who are honest with us. I don't know if I'll ever fully forgive them. Jake definitely won't. He's made peace with not having a relationship with our parents, and honestly, I respect that. I'm trying to separate the parents who raised me from the people who lied to me. Some days it works, most days it doesn't. The thing that haunts me most is how easy it was for them. How they all just agreed to this insane arrangement and carried it out for 30 years without cracking. How good they were at pretending. It makes me wonder what else people are capable of hiding. Family secrets have a way of destroying everything, but workplace betrayals? Those cut just as deep when the knife comes from someone you trusted daily. I met Lisa on my second day at the marketing firm. She was in the cubicle next to mine, and she leaned over with this huge smile and asked if I wanted to grab coffee. I said yes, mostly because I was desperate for a friendly face in a new place, and that was it. We clicked instantly. She was funny, sarcastic, easy to talk to. Within a month, we were doing daily coffee runs, having lunch together almost every day, and texting outside of work. Within 6 months, we were hanging out on weekends, going to concerts, trying new restaurants. She became my best friend. Not just my work best friend, my actual best friend. The job itself was intense. We worked at a mid-sized marketing firm that handled campaigns for some pretty demanding clients. My boss, Karen, was one of those managers who micromanaged everything and then took credit when things went well, but blamed the team when things went south. She was exhausting, and some of our clients were borderline abusive, the kind who'd call at 9 p.m., demanding revisions on projects they'd approved 3 times already. It was a high-stress environment, and Lisa was my outlet. We'd vent to each other constantly. I'd complain about Karen's latest power trip. She'd rant about whichever client was making her life hell, and we'd laugh about the absurdity of it all. It felt safe. She felt safe. I trusted her completely. I told her things I wouldn't tell anyone else. When I was frustrated with a project, when I thought a client was being unreasonable, when I felt like Karen was playing favorites. Lisa always listened, always validated my feelings, always made me feel like I wasn't crazy for being annoyed. She'd say things like, "Karen's the worst, you're totally right," or, "That client is a nightmare, don't let them get to you." It felt like solidarity, like we were in the trenches together. We worked together like that for 3 years. I thought we'd be friends forever, honestly. We'd even talked about eventually starting our own agency someday, being our own bosses, leaving the corporate nonsense behind. It was a dream we shared, or at least I thought we did. Then the promotion opportunity came up, senior account manager position. It was the next logical step for both of us, and we'd both been at the company long enough to be considered. I knew it would be competitive, but I figured may the best woman win, you know? We even joked about it. She said if I got it, she'd be happy for me, and I said the same. I meant it. The announcement came on a Wednesday afternoon. Lisa got the promotion. I didn't. I was disappointed, obviously, but I tried to be supportive. I congratulated her, took her out for drinks after work, told her she deserved it, and I mostly believed that. But privately, I was hurt. I'd been at the company longer. My performance reviews were consistently excellent. I'd brought in more new clients that year than anyone else on the team. It didn't make sense to me why I'd been passed over, so I vented to Lisa about it, because that's what we did. That's what we'd always done. I told her I thought it was unfair, that I didn't understand the decision, that Karen probably had something to do with it because she'd never liked me. I called Karen incompetent, which, looking back, wasn't professional, but I was angry and hurt, and I thought I was talking to my best friend in private. I also complained about one of our clients, a guy who'd been particularly awful that week, calling him a nightmare to work with. Lisa listened, nodded sympathetically, said all the right things. She told me I had every right to be upset. She made me feel heard. That was a Friday. The following Thursday, I got an email from HR asking me to come in for a meeting first thing Monday morning. No explanation, just a vague, "We need to discuss some concerns." I asked Lisa if she'd gotten a similar email. She said no and told me not to worry. It was probably nothing. I spent the weekend anxious, trying to figure out what I could have possibly done wrong. Monday morning, I walked into the HR office. Karen was there. So was the head of HR, a woman named Janet, and another manager I didn't know well. They all looked serious. Janet asked me to sit down, and then she opened a laptop and said they needed to play something for me. Then came the breaking point. It was my voice, coming through the laptop speakers, my voice venting about Karen, calling her incompetent, saying she played favorites and didn't know how to manage people. Then another clip. Me complaining about the client, calling him a nightmare, saying he was impossible to please and I dreaded every interaction with him. Then another clip. Me talking about the company's leadership, saying I thought some of their decisions were short-sighted. Clip after clip after clip, all of me, saying things I'd said in private to Lisa. I felt like I was going to throw up. I looked at Karen. She looked furious. Janet asked if I recognized the recordings. I said yes, but I didn't understand where they came from. She said they'd been submitted to management by a concerned employee who felt I was creating a toxic work environment and damaging team morale. She said the recordings spanned the last 6 months. She asked if I wanted to explain myself. I didn't know what to say. I asked who recorded me. Janet said they couldn't disclose that, but it was someone I interacted with regularly. And then it clicked. Lisa. It had to be Lisa. She was the only person I talked to like that. The only person I vented to. The only person who would have had access to those conversations. I asked if it was Lisa. Janet didn't confirm or deny it, but her face told me everything I needed to know. I felt like the floor had opened up underneath me. My best friend, the person I trusted most in the world. She'd been recording me for 6 months, every coffee run, every lunch, every private conversation where I thought I was safe to vent. She'd recorded all of it and then handed it over to management. I tried to explain that these were private conversations, that everyone vents about their job sometimes, that I never said any of this in front of clients or in a professional setting. But Janet cut me off. She said that regardless of the context, my comments were inappropriate and reflected poorly on the company. She said they couldn't have employees who spoke about leadership and clients in such derogatory terms. And then she said they were terminating my employment effective immediately. I couldn't even process it. I'd been fired, just like that. 3 years at the company, gone. And Lisa, my so-called best friend, had orchestrated the whole thing. I found out later through a mutual colleague who still talked to me that Lisa had been planning this for months. She knew we were both up for the promotion. She knew I was her biggest competition. So she started recording our conversations, waiting for me to say something she could use against me. And when the promotion was announced and she got it instead of me, she saw her opportunity. She submitted the recordings to management with this whole narrative about how I was toxic, how I was sabotaging team morale, how I was bad-mouthing the company. She made herself look like the hero, the concerned employee who was just trying to protect the company culture. And it worked. She got promoted to the exact role I'd wanted within days of me being fired. She moved into the office that should have been mine. She took over my accounts. She erased me and stepped into my life like I'd never existed. I was devastated. I'd lost my job and my best friend in the same week. I didn't know what to do. I couldn't get a reference from the company because I'd been fired. I was worried I'd never work in marketing again. I spent about 2 weeks just sitting in my apartment, spiraling, feeling like my entire life had collapsed. But then I got angry, and when I get angry, I get strategic. I called a lawyer. I explained the situation, played her some of the recordings that I'd managed to secretly record on my phone during the HR meeting, and my lawyer's eyes lit up. She said, "Do you know what state you live in?" I said yes, obviously. And she said, "This state has two-party consent laws for recordings. What Lisa did was illegal." I didn't know that. I had no idea. But apparently, in our state, you can't record someone without their knowledge and consent. It's a felony. And Lisa had recorded me dozens of times over 6 months without ever telling me. She'd broken the law, and the company had used that illegal evidence to fire me. My lawyer said we had a case, a strong one, wrongful termination, illegal wiretapping, the whole thing. So we sued. We sued Lisa personally, and we sued the company for using illegally obtained evidence to justify my termination. The legal process took about 8 months. Discovery was brutal. We subpoenaed the recordings, the emails between Lisa and HR, everything, and what we found was damning. Lisa had explicitly told management that she'd recorded me without my knowledge. She'd bragged about it in emails, calling it evidence, and saying she'd been documenting my behavior. The company had accepted this evidence without questioning whether it was legal. They'd never asked Lisa if she had my consent. They just took the recordings and fired me. The company tried to settle quietly. They didn't want this going to court. Bad press, potential liability, the whole thing was a nightmare for them. My lawyer negotiated. We ended up settling for $180,000. The company also agreed to give me a neutral reference and remove the termination from my record, listing it as a resignation instead. But the settlement wasn't even the best part. Lisa was fired immediately once the legal case started. The company couldn't keep her on staff once it became clear she'd committed a felony. And then the district attorney got involved. Lisa was charged with felony wiretapping, multiple counts, one for each recording. She pleaded guilty to avoid jail time, got probation and community service, but the felony conviction stayed on her record. Her career in marketing was over. I heard through the grapevine that she applied to dozens of firms after she was fired, and no one would touch her. A quick Google search of her name brought up articles about the case. She was unhireable. She destroyed my career, and in the process, she destroyed her own. I used part of the settlement money to start my own consulting firm. I do freelance marketing strategy for small businesses, work from home, set my own hours. It's the dream I used to talk about with Lisa, except now I'm living it alone. And honestly, I'm thriving. My client list is growing. I'm making more money than I ever did at the firm, and I don't have to deal with people like Karen or clients who call me at 9 p.m. or co-workers who secretly record me. Lisa tried to reach out once, a few months after everything settled. She sent me this long email apologizing, saying she didn't think it would go this far, that she was desperate for the promotion and made a terrible mistake. She said she missed me. I deleted it without responding. There's no coming back from that kind of betrayal. The whole thing taught me a hard lesson about trust. I'm more careful now about what I say, even to people I think are my friends. I don't vent the way I used to. I keep my frustrations to myself or talk to my therapist. It's lonely sometimes, but it's safer. And every time I see Lisa's name pop up on LinkedIn with no job title, no company, just seeking opportunities, I feel a tiny bit of satisfaction. She thought she could eliminate the competition and coast into success. Instead, she destroyed both of us, and only one of us managed to rebuild. Betrayal in the office is brutal, but what happens when the person mentoring you is actually your worst enemy? I'd been at the tech company for almost 4 years when David took me under his wing. He was a senior manager, well respected, the kind of guy everyone wanted to work with. When he approached me after a product meeting and said he saw potential in me, I was thrilled. He started mentoring me officially, meeting with me once a week to review my projects, giving me advice on navigating corporate politics, introducing me to executives I'd never have access to otherwise. He told me he wanted to help me climb the ladder, that I reminded him of himself when he was younger. I trusted him completely. For 2 years, David was the mentor I'd always hoped for. He gave me challenging assignments, let me lead important projects, and constantly told me I was on track for a promotion. He'd say things like, "You're going places. Just keep doing what you're doing and the company will recognize it." I worked my ass off. 80-hour weeks, weekends, late nights. I wanted to prove I deserved his faith in me. And honestly, I thought I was doing well. My performance reviews were excellent. My projects were successful. I was getting positive feedback from clients and other managers. Then, about 6 months before everything fell apart, I developed something I was really proud of. It was a software solution that automated a major part of our workflow, something that would save the company thousands of hours and a ton of money. I'd been working on it for months in my spare time, refining it, testing it, making sure it was bulletproof. When it was finally ready, I didn't go straight to the executives. I went to David first, because that's what you do with your mentor. You show them your work, get their feedback, let them help you present it in the best way possible. David was enthusiastic when I showed him. He pulled up a chair, watched the demo, asked detailed questions, and then leaned back with this huge smile. He said it was incredible, that this was exactly the kind of innovation the company needed, and that he'd personally champion it to the executive team. He told me to send him all the documentation, the code, everything, so he could review it thoroughly before we presented it together. I did. I sent him every file, every note, every piece of research. I trusted him completely. Weeks went by. I kept asking David when we'd present it, and he kept saying he was waiting for the right moment, that timing was everything with executives, that we needed to be strategic. I believed him. He was the experienced one. He knew how these things worked. So I waited. Then the company sent out an email announcing a major new innovation. I opened it, expecting maybe it was about some other department's project. But as I read, my stomach dropped. It was my solution, word for word, detail for detail, my software. Except it wasn't credited to me. It was credited to David. The email praised David for his forward thinking and innovation. It said he'd developed this groundbreaking solution that would transform our workflows. There was a photo of him shaking hands with the CEO. The announcement said David was being promoted to vice president and receiving a $50,000 bonus for his contribution to the company. I sat at my desk staring at the screen, trying to process what I was seeing. This had to be a mistake. Maybe David had presented it and forgotten to mention my involvement. Maybe the communications team had screwed up the email. I walked to David's office. He was on the phone, but he waved me in with a big smile like nothing was wrong. When he hung up, I asked him what happened. I said I'd seen the announcement and I didn't understand why my name wasn't mentioned. David's expression shifted. The warmth disappeared. He said that while I'd contributed some initial ideas, he'd done the bulk of the development and refinement. He said that's how mentorship works, that junior employees provide raw concepts and senior leaders turn them into viable solutions. He said I should be grateful for the learning experience and that maybe next cycle I'd be ready for a promotion. Then he suggested I get back to work. I left his office feeling like I'd been punched in the stomach. I knew what I'd created. I knew how much work I'd put into it. And I knew, without question, that David had stolen it. But I had no proof. I'd sent him everything willingly. I'd trusted him. And now he was a VP with a $50,000 bonus. And I was sitting at my same desk with my same title and my same salary, watching him take credit for my work. I spent the next week trying to figure out what to do. I considered going to HR, but what would I say? I gave my mentor my work and now he's claiming it's his? I had no evidence that it was mine. No emails explicitly stating I was the sole creator. No witnesses to our conversations. David had been too smart for that. He'd covered his tracks, but that wasn't even the worst part. I started asking around quietly, talking to other people who'd worked under David, and I heard stories, similar stories. A guy in engineering said David had taken credit for his database redesign. A woman in product said David had presented her market analysis as his own research. It wasn't just me. David had been doing this for years. He'd built his entire career on stealing his mentee's work, and no one had ever been able to prove it. That's when I decided to get proof. I stayed late one Friday night after everyone had left, and I installed a small hidden camera in David's office. I tucked it on his bookshelf behind some binders, angled so it had a clear view of his desk. It wasn't legal, probably, but I was past caring about that. I needed evidence. I needed something concrete that would show who David really was. I let the camera run for a week. Every night I'd come in early, swap out the memory card, and review the footage at home. Most of it was boring. David on Zoom calls, typing emails, eating lunch at his desk. But then, on day 5, I hit gold. David was on the phone with someone, his office door closed. He was laughing, relaxed, clearly talking to a friend. And then he said it. He said, "I took my mentee's work, man. The whole software solution. Presented it as mine. The executives ate it up. 50K bonus and a VP title. Kid has no idea how corporate works." I had to replay it 3 times to make sure I'd heard correctly. He was bragging about it, openly admitting he'd stolen my work. I kept watching. He went on to talk about how he'd done this before, how it was easy to take credit for junior employees' work because no one questioned senior leadership. He said something like, "Mentorship is great, you get all their ideas and none of the grunt work." Then the conversation shifted and he started talking about someone else on his team. He said he was working on a new project and had a mentee developing it now, and he'd probably take credit for that one too. He laughed, he thought it was funny, and suddenly the whole plan fell apart for him because the camera also caught something else. After he hung up, David pulled up confidential company files he shouldn't have had access to. Personnel records, financial documents, information that was way above his clearance level. I watched him screenshot several pages and email them to his personal account. That was a direct violation of company policy. Fireable on its own, regardless of the plagiarism, I had everything I needed. Video evidence of David admitting to theft, bragging about exploiting employees, and violating company security protocols. I copied the footage onto 3 separate drives, put one in a safe deposit box, and took the other 2 to work the following Monday. I didn't go to HR. I went straight to the CEO's office. I told his assistant it was urgent and that I had evidence of serious misconduct by a VP. She looked skeptical, but she let me wait. 20 minutes later, the CEO called me in. I showed him the footage, all of it. He watched in silence, his expression getting darker with every minute. When it was over, he asked me if I had the original camera and memory cards. I did. He called in the head of legal and the head of HR. We spent the next 3 hours in a conference room going through everything. They asked me detailed questions about the software solution, about my interactions with David, about what I knew of his behavior with other employees. I told them everything. The company launched an internal investigation that day. They pulled records, interviewed David's current and former mentees, reviewed project submissions and emails. What they found was a pattern of plagiarism spanning 5 employees over 6 years. David had systematically stolen work from junior team members, presented it as his own, and built his career on their backs. David was fired within 48 hours. They revoked his VP title, clawed back his bonus, and escorted him out of the building. The company issued a formal apology to me and the other employees he'd stolen from. They offered me the VP position David had been given, along with back pay for what I should have been earning, and a public acknowledgement that the software solution was mine. I accepted. It felt surreal sitting in the office that should have been mine months ago, with the title I'd earned. The company also updated their mentorship policies and put new oversight measures in place to prevent this from happening again. David tried to fight it. He hired a lawyer, threatened to sue for wrongful termination, claimed the investigation was biased. But the evidence was overwhelming. The recordings, the pattern across multiple employees, the security violations. His lawyer eventually told him to drop it. David's reputation in the industry was destroyed. I heard from a former colleague that he'd applied to several companies and been rejected by all of them. Word had gotten around about what he'd done. He was blacklisted. I wish I could say I felt good about it, but mostly I just felt tired. Tired of fighting, tired of having to prove myself, tired of realizing that someone I trusted had been using me the entire time. The promotion was great, the money was great, but it didn't erase the betrayal. It didn't give me back the 2 years I spent believing David actually cared about my career. I'm more careful now. I document everything, keep records of my work, and I'm cautious about who I trust. The other employees David stole from reached out after everything came out. We formed this unofficial support group, grabbing drinks occasionally and venting about corporate politics. It helps knowing I'm not alone. David sent me an email a few months later. It was short, just a few lines about how he was sorry and that he hoped I could forgive him someday. I didn't respond. There's nothing to say to someone like that. He made his choices, and now he's living with the consequences. The VP role is good. I'm doing work I'm proud of, leading a team, actually mentoring junior employees the right way. And every time I walk past the office that used to be David's, I'm reminded that sometimes the bad guys don't win. Sometimes they just get caught. While we're on the subject of workplace nightmares, imagine being framed for something you didn't do, only to discover your accuser had the darkest secret. I work at a pretty conservative finance firm, the kind of place where people still wear full suits every day, where the dress code is strict, and where HR sends out reminders about professional conduct at least once a month. It's old school, traditional, and honestly a little uptight, but the pay is good and the work is stable. I'd been there for 5 years when Jenna was hired as a junior analyst. She seemed nice enough at first, friendly, eager to learn, always smiling. She sat a few desks away from me, and we'd make small talk in the break room occasionally. Normal co-worker stuff. About a month into her working there, she asked me for help with a client presentation. She said she'd heard I was good at building financial models and wondered if I could walk her through some Excel formulas. I said sure, no problem. I spent maybe an hour with her going over spreadsheets, showing her some shortcuts, answering her questions. It was completely professional. We were in the open office area, other people around, nothing weird about it. She thanked me, I went back to my desk, and that was that. Or so I thought. Over the next few weeks, Jenna would occasionally ask me for help with other projects. I'd answer her questions, offer advice, sometimes review her work if she asked. I did the same thing for other junior analysts. It was just part of being a senior member of the team. She was always polite, always professional. I never got any strange vibes from her. I never thought twice about any of our interactions. Then one day, out of nowhere, I got called into an HR meeting. It was a Thursday afternoon. I was in the middle of reviewing a contract when my manager came over and quietly told me HR needed to see me immediately. I asked what it was about. He said he didn't know, but his face told me it was serious. I walked down to the HR office with this knot in my stomach, running through every possible thing I could have done wrong. Maybe I'd messed up a compliance form. Maybe there was an issue with my timesheet. I had no idea. I walked into the meeting room and there were 3 people waiting for me. The head of HR, a woman named Margaret, another HR rep I didn't know well, and someone from legal. They asked me to sit down. Margaret folded her hands on the table and said they'd received a formal complaint about me. A harassment complaint from Jenna. I felt like someone had dumped ice water over my head. I said there must be some mistake. Margaret said Jenna had filed a detailed report claiming I'd been sending her inappropriate messages, making unwanted advances, and creating a hostile work environment. She said Jenna had provided evidence, screenshots of text messages. Margaret slid a folder across the table. I opened it. The texts were vile, explicit, sexual, aggressive. They were sent from a number that was almost identical to mine, just 1 digit off. The messages referenced things we'd talked about at work, used my name, and were clearly designed to look like they came from me. I stared at them, my brain struggling to process what I was seeing. I told them I never sent these. I said I didn't even have Jenna's phone number. Margaret asked if I could prove that. I pulled out my phone right there and showed them my text history. Jenna's number wasn't in it. I never texted her, never called her, nothing. But the legal rep said the number on the screenshots was close enough to mine that it could be explained as a typo or a secondary phone. They said they had to take the complaint seriously and that pending a full investigation, I was being suspended without pay. Effective immediately. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I asked to see the screenshots again. I studied them, looking for anything that would prove they were fake. The timestamps, the formatting, something. But they looked real. Whoever made them had done a good job. Margaret said I needed to leave the building and that I'd be contacted once the investigation was complete. I asked how long that would take. She said at least 2 weeks, possibly longer. I left the office in a daze. I didn't even go back to my desk to get my things. Security escorted me out like I was some kind of criminal. People stared as I walked through the office. I could see them whispering. By the time I got to my car, I was shaking. I'd just been accused of something I didn't do, and I had no idea how to prove my innocence. The first thing I did was call a lawyer. I explained the situation, sent her copies of the screenshots, and asked what my options were. She said the first step was to prove the messages didn't come from my phone. She referred me to a forensic tech expert who could analyze my phone records and metadata. I hired him immediately. It cost me $2,000, but I didn't care. I needed proof. The forensic analysis came back 3 days later. The expert confirmed that none of those messages originated from my phone or my number. He traced the number on the screenshots and found it was a spoofed number, created using an app that lets you send texts from fake numbers. He provided a full report with technical details, timestamps, and evidence that the messages were fabricated. I sent everything to my lawyer and to HR, but that wasn't even the worst part. My lawyer suggested I hire a private investigator to figure out why Jenna would do this. She said there had to be a motive, something that would explain why she'd go to such lengths to frame me. I was hesitant at first because it felt invasive, but I was desperate. So I hired a PI, and what he found was absolutely wild. Jenna ran an OnlyFans account, an explicit one. She was creating adult content under a pseudonym and making decent money from it. The PI found her account, verified it was her, and documented everything. But here's the kicker. She was terrified someone at work would find out. Our company has a strict code of conduct, and anything that could damage the firm's reputation is grounds for immediate termination. If anyone discovered her OnlyFans, she'd be fired on the spot. The PI dug deeper. He found posts on a private forum where Jenna had talked about her fears of being exposed. She'd mentioned that a co-worker had asked her questions about her side income, and she was worried they'd figure it out. That co-worker was me. I'd asked her once, casually, how she afforded her apartment on a junior analyst salary, because I knew the pay wasn't great for new hires. It was an offhand comment, not even serious, but she'd taken it as a threat, so she decided to frame me preemptively. She figured if she accused me of harassment first, anything I said about her later would look like retaliation. She was trying to discredit me before I could expose her, except I had no idea about her OnlyFans. I wasn't investigating her. I wasn't a threat. She'd created this entire nightmare based on her own paranoia, and it gets worse. The PI found footage of Jenna filming content in the office bathroom after hours. She'd been staying late, using the company bathroom to create explicit videos and posting them online. She'd filmed in a space that had the company logo visible in the background in some shots. It was a massive violation of company policy and potentially illegal. I took everything to my lawyer, the forensic phone report, the PI's findings, screenshots of her OnlyFans, the bathroom footage, all of it. My lawyer contacted HR and requested an immediate meeting with executives. She said if they didn't reinstate me and investigate Jenna, we'd be filing a lawsuit for wrongful termination, defamation, and emotional distress. The meeting happened 2 days later. Me, my lawyer, Margaret from HR, the legal team, and 2 executives I'd never met before. My lawyer presented the evidence methodically. The spoof number, the proof the text didn't come from me, Jenna's OnlyFans account, the bathroom footage, the motive. The room was silent when she finished. One of the executives asked to see the bathroom footage again. My lawyer played it. You could see Jenna clearly, setting up her phone, recording content, and then leaving. The company logo was visible on a towel dispenser in the background of one video. It was undeniable. Margaret looked like she wanted to disappear into the floor. The legal rep was furiously taking notes. One of the executives said they'd handle this immediately, and that I'd be fully reinstated with back pay and compensation for what I'd been through. He apologized, said this should never have happened, and promised a thorough internal review of their harassment complaint procedures. Jenna was fired that afternoon. Security escorted her out of the building while I watched from a conference room. She tried to argue, tried to say the evidence was fabricated, but no one was listening. The company also reported her to the police for filing a false report. Last I heard, she's facing criminal charges. Filing a false harassment claim is illegal, and the company decided to press charges to protect themselves from liability. I was reinstated the next week. They gave me 3 months back pay, a formal apology, and a transfer to a different department with a raise. They said it was to give me a fresh start, away from anyone who'd witnessed the accusations. I appreciated it, honestly. I didn't want to sit in that same office where people had watched me get escorted out. The whole thing messed me up for a while. I was paranoid about every interaction with coworkers, constantly worried someone else would make a false accusation. I started documenting everything, keeping records of every conversation, every email, every meeting. My therapist says it's a trauma response and that it will get better with time. I'm working on it, Jenna's life, from what I've heard, is in shambles. She can't get another job in finance because the story got around. A quick Google search of her name brings up articles about the case. Her OnlyFans account was shut down after the company reported her. She tried to rebrand under a different name, but people figured it out. She basically destroyed her own career because she was afraid of something that wasn't even happening. The irony isn't lost on me. She tried to ruin my life to protect her secret, and in doing so, she exposed everything and lost everything. I should feel satisfied, maybe, but mostly I just feel exhausted. The whole ordeal took months of my life, cost me thousands in legal fees, and left me with trust issues I'm still working through. But at least I got my job back. At least people know the truth, and at least Jenna can't do this to anyone else. From workplace chaos to family warfare, this next tale proves that sometimes the people who raised you can become your greatest enemies. I married Derek 3 years ago. He's a good man, successful, stable, everything I thought I wanted. He had one daughter from his first marriage, Chloe, who was 14 at the time. Her mother had passed away from cancer 2 years before we met, and Derek was still grieving. I understood that. I went into the marriage knowing I'd be a stepmother, knowing Chloe would be part of the package. I thought I could handle it. I thought we'd eventually bond, become close, maybe even develop a real mother-daughter relationship. That never happened. Chloe tolerated me at best. She was polite when Derek was around, but cold when it was just the two of us. She'd answer my questions with one-word responses, decline my invitations to go shopping or grab lunch, and spend most of her time in her room with the door closed. I tried for the first year. I really did. I'd ask about her day, her friends, her interests. She'd give me nothing, and I started to realize she didn't want a relationship with me. She had a mother even if she was gone, and I wasn't going to replace her. Derek didn't see it, or maybe he didn't want to see it. He'd tell me to be patient, that Chloe was still processing her grief, that she'd come around eventually. But she didn't. If anything, she pulled further away. And the older she got, the more she looked like her mother. Derek had photos of his late wife all over the house, and Chloe was her mirror image. Same dark hair, same eyes, same smile. It was like living with a ghost. By the time Chloe was 17 and applying to colleges, I was exhausted. Exhausted from trying to connect with her. Exhausted from being the outsider in my own home. Exhausted from watching Derek pour all his energy into his daughter, while barely noticing me. He was obsessed with her college applications. He'd spend hours helping her write essays, reviewing her transcripts, researching schools. Chloe wanted to go Ivy League, just like her mother had. Derek was determined to make that happen. And I just sat there, watching them bond over something I had no part in, feeling more and more invisible. Derek would cancel our date nights to help Chloe with applications. He'd spend money on college prep tutors and application coaches without consulting me. He'd talk endlessly about how proud he was of her, how she was going to do amazing things, how her mother would be so proud. I started to feel like I didn't matter, like I was just there to play house while he lived his real life with his daughter. The bitterness crept in slowly. I'd watch them at the kitchen table laughing over some essay draft, and I'd feel this ugly resentment building in my chest. I hated feeling that way. I hated myself for being jealous of a 17-year-old girl, but I couldn't help it. Derek had time and money and attention for Chloe, but nothing left for me. I felt like a stranger in my own marriage. That's when I started thinking about the applications. Chloe had submitted to 12 schools, Ivy Leagues, competitive liberal arts colleges, places with single-digit acceptance rates. She was smart, her grades were excellent. But those schools reject thousands of qualified students every year. What if she didn't get in? What if she had to go to a state school instead? Maybe then Derek would realize he'd been neglecting our marriage. Maybe then he'd refocus on us instead of obsessing over his daughter's future. I knew it was wrong even as I was thinking it, but the bitterness had taken root and I couldn't shake it. So one night when Derek and Chloe were both asleep, I went into her room and opened her laptop. She'd left it unlocked. I accessed her email and looked at her sent folder. All her college applications were there, submitted, time-stamped, ready to be reviewed by admissions committees. I started small. I opened one of her submitted essays and added a few sentences of gibberish in the middle. Nothing too obvious, just enough to make it seem like she hadn't proofread carefully. Then I changed the email address for one of her recommendation letters, so instead of going to the admissions office, It went to a fake address I created. Then I did it again with another application, and another. I spent 2 hours that night systematically sabotaging her applications, making tiny changes that would undermine her chances without being immediately obvious. I felt sick doing it, but I also felt powerful in a twisted way, like I finally had some control over my own life. I closed the laptop, went back to bed, and lay there staring at the ceiling, wondering what I'd just done. Over the next few weeks, the rejection letters started arriving, one by one: Yale, Harvard, Princeton, Columbia. Chloe would open each email with hope and then crumble when she read the words, "We regret to inform you." Derek was devastated. Chloe was inconsolable. She'd lock herself in her room and cry for hours. Derek would try to comfort her, telling her it wasn't her fault, that admissions were unpredictable, that she'd get in somewhere. But she kept getting rejected. Even her target schools, the ones she should have been a strong candidate for, turned her down. She started questioning everything: her essays, her interview skills, her extracurriculars. She didn't understand what had gone wrong. Derek hired a college counselor to review her applications and figure out what happened, but by then it was too late to reapply. I watched it all unfold and felt nothing, or maybe I felt relief. Derek was finally paying attention to me again, asking me for emotional support, leaning on me. It felt like I mattered again. But Chloe was falling apart, and some small part of me, the part that wasn't consumed by bitterness, felt guilty. Then came the breaking point. Chloe received an email from her safety school, a decent state university she'd applied to as a backup. It was an acceptance letter, full ride scholarship. She was thrilled, or as thrilled as she could be given everything else. She showed Derek, and he hugged her, told her he was proud of her, said it was a great school and she'd do amazing there. But I couldn't let that happen. I couldn't let her have even that small victory. So the next day, when Chloe was at school and Derek was at work, I logged into her email again and deleted the acceptance letter. Then I sent a message to the school from her account, declining the offer. I wrote that she'd decided to take a gap year instead. Chloe came home that afternoon and went to her laptop to reread the acceptance email. And that's when everything unraveled. She called Derek at work, panicked, saying the email was gone. He told her to check her trash folder. Maybe she'd deleted it by accident. But it wasn't there. And when she logged into the school's application portal, it showed her acceptance had been declined. She started crying, saying she didn't decline it. She didn't do anything. Derek came home early. They spent an hour on the phone with the admissions office, trying to figure out what happened. That's when Chloe said something that made my blood run cold. She said she thought someone had accessed her email. She said she'd been having a weird feeling for weeks, like something was off with her applications, and now this. Derek asked who would do that. Chloe looked at me. I laughed it off. I said that was ridiculous. Why would I sabotage her? But Chloe wasn't laughing. She said she was going to install monitoring software on her laptop to see if anyone accessed it. Derek said that was a good idea, just to be safe. I felt my stomach drop. 2 days later, Chloe set a trap. She left her laptop unlocked in the kitchen, opened to her email, and went upstairs. She told Derek she was taking a nap, but really she was watching the laptop remotely through the monitoring software she'd installed. And I walked right into it. I sat down at the laptop thinking I was alone. I logged into her email to make sure there was no record of my sabotage to cover my tracks. I was deleting some sent messages when Chloe came down the stairs. She had her phone out recording. She asked me what I was doing. I said I was just checking something. She asked why I was in her email. I said I wasn't. She showed me her phone, the monitoring software, the recording of me logging in, and then Derek walked in. I tried to lie. I said it was a misunderstanding, that I was trying to help her recover the deleted acceptance email, but Chloe pulled up the application history. She showed Derek the changes I'd made months ago, the altered essays, the redirected recommendation letters, everything. She'd been investigating for days, going through logs and timestamps, piecing it all together. And now she had proof. Derek just stared at me. He didn't yell. He didn't even look angry. He looked horrified. Like he was seeing me for the first time and realizing he'd married a stranger. Chloe started screaming at me, asking why I'd do this, what was wrong with me. And I snapped. I yelled back that I was tired of being invisible, tired of watching him obsess over his dead wife's daughter, tired of being ignored in my own marriage. I said Chloe had everything: his love, his money, his attention, and I had nothing. The words came out like poison. Derek told me to get out. I said it was my house too. He said he didn't care. He wanted me out. Chloe was recording the whole thing, every word, every confession. I just admitted everything on camera. Derek filed for divorce the next day. He also filed for a restraining order, claiming I was a danger to Chloe. The judge granted it. I had to move out within 48 hours. I stayed at a hotel, then eventually found an apartment. The divorce was fast. Derek had the recording, the evidence, everything he needed. I didn't even fight it. What could I say? Chloe contacted every school she'd applied to with the evidence of sabotage. She explained what had happened, provided the recordings and the email logs, and asked if she could reapply. Several schools, to their credit, allowed her to submit late applications. Georgetown accepted her with a full scholarship. She's there now, thriving, living the life she should have had all along. My reputation is destroyed. The story got around. People I knew, mutual friends, family, they all know what I did. Some of them reached out, asking if it was true. I couldn't deny it. Derek got a restraining order, so I'm not allowed to contact him or Chloe. I see updates about her on social media sometimes, through mutual connections. She looks happy. Derek looks happy. And I'm here, alone, trying to figure out how I became the villain in my own story. I'm in therapy now. My therapist says the sabotage wasn't really about Chloe. It was about my own insecurities, my fear of being unloved, my inability to handle feeling second place. She says I need to work through why I felt so threatened by a teenager, why I couldn't communicate my needs to Derek, why I let bitterness turn me into someone capable of cruelty. I don't have good answers yet. I know I was wrong. I know I hurt Chloe in ways I can't undo. I know I destroyed my marriage and any chance of redemption. Some days I wish I could go back and make different choices. Most days I just sit with the weight of what I've done. Parents are supposed to protect, not destroy, but when deception runs through generations, the fallout can be catastrophic. Planning my wedding was supposed to be one of the happiest times of my life. Mark and I had been together for 4 years, and everything about the engagement felt right. My mum, Jane, was incredible through the whole process. We spent weekends trying out caterers, scrolling through Pinterest boards at midnight, debating flower arrangements like they were life or death decisions. It was the bonding experience I'd always hoped we'd have. She was my best friend, my biggest supporter, and the person I wanted standing next to me on the most important day of my life. My Aunt Carol was around during the planning too, but in a different way. She'd show up uninvited to dress fittings, make comments about how the wedding was too extravagant, or how young people today didn't understand the meaning of marriage. She'd compare my choices to her own wedding 30 years ago, always with this edge in her voice that made it clear she thought hers was better. My mum would laugh it off, tell me Carol had always been like that, competitive and a little bitter. I figured it was just family dynamics. Every family has that one relative who can't help but rain on your parade. But looking back now, there were signs I missed. The way Carol would watch my mum and me together, her jaw tight, her eyes cold. The snide little comments she'd make about how my mum didn't deserve such a devoted daughter. How she'd bring up my childhood and say things like, "You don't even know the whole story." I'd brush it off, assuming she was just jealous of our relationship. I had no idea how deep that jealousy actually ran. The wedding day itself was perfect. At least it started that way. We'd booked this beautiful vineyard venue, rolling hills in the background, string lights everywhere, exactly the romantic setting I dreamed of. 150 guests, all the people we loved most. Mark looked incredible waiting for me at the altar, and when I walked down the aisle with my mum, I felt like I was floating. The ceremony was flawless. We said our vows, kissed, and walked back down the aisle as husband and wife while everyone cheered. I remember thinking nothing could ruin this day. The reception was in full swing by the time the toast started. Mark's best man went first, told some funny stories, made everyone laugh. Then my maid of honor gave a sweet speech that made me cry. My mom was supposed to go next. She was standing up, champagne glass in hand, when Aunt Carol suddenly grabbed the microphone from the MC. Everyone looked confused. Carol wasn't on the toast list. She hadn't asked to speak, but she was already talking, thanking everyone for coming, saying how beautiful the ceremony was. Her voice was warm, almost too warm, and I remember feeling uneasy, but not knowing why. Mark squeezed my hand under the table. I squeezed back, thinking maybe this would just be a quick, harmless speech from an aunt who wanted attention. Then her tone changed. The warmth drained out of her voice like someone had flipped a switch. She said, "I need to tell my niece something I should have said years ago." The room went silent. That heavy, uncomfortable silence where everyone knows something bad is about to happen, but no one can stop it. I looked at my mom. Her face had gone white. She was shaking her head slightly, mouthing no. But Carol wasn't looking at her. Carol was looking at me. And here's where it gets absurd. Carol said, "I'm your biological mother, not Jane." Just like that. No build-up, no gentle explanation. Just a bomb dropped in the middle of my wedding reception. I felt like the ground had disappeared beneath me. People started murmuring. Someone gasped. Mark's grip on my hand tightened. I looked at my mum, Jane, the woman who raised me, expecting her to shut this down, to tell Carol she was lying, to do something. But she was crying, silent tears streaming down her face. And I knew it was true. Carol kept talking. She said my mom, Jane, had gotten pregnant at 16. Carol was 24 at the time, already married, stable. The family decided it would be better if Carol raised me as her own child, while Jane finished school and went to college. They'd tell everyone Carol had a baby, and Jane would be the cool aunt who visited on holidays. It was supposed to protect Jane's future, give her a chance at a normal life. But Carol said something shifted when I was a toddler. Jane couldn't stay away. She wanted to be involved in everything, wanted to be called mum, wanted to be the primary parent, and the family went along with it. They just swapped the narrative. Suddenly Jane was my mum, and Carol was my aunt, and everyone acted like that had always been the truth. Carol said she went along with it because she thought it was best for me. But watching Jane take credit for raising me, watching her get all the love and gratitude that should have been Carol's, it destroyed her. She said she'd spent decades resenting Jane, resenting me, resenting the entire situation, and she chose my wedding day to finally tell the truth because she wanted me to know that the woman I'd been bonding with, the woman I called Mum, wasn't who I thought she was. She wanted to hurt Jane the way Jane had hurt her. She wanted to ruin the perfect mother-daughter moment we'd been having, and she wanted me to feel the same betrayal she'd felt all these years. The room was dead silent when she finished. She put the microphone down and walked back to her seat like she hadn't just detonated a nuclear bomb in the middle of my reception. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. I just stood up and ran. I ran out of the reception hall, through the vineyard, kept running until I couldn't hear the music anymore. Mark caught up with me eventually, out of breath, asking what he could do. I didn't have an answer. I just stood there sobbing while my brand new husband held me. My mum found us about 10 minutes later. She was a mess, mascara running down her face, hands shaking. She tried to explain. She said she was 16 and terrified when she got pregnant. Her parents thought giving me to Carol was the best option, that Carol was ready to be a mother and Jane wasn't. But Jane said she couldn't do it. She couldn't watch someone else raise her baby. So when I was 2, she fought to take me back. She said it wasn't planned, it wasn't malicious. She just loved me too much to stay away. She said she should have told me the truth years ago. But the longer she waited, the harder it got. She was terrified of losing me, terrified I'd hate her for lying. She said Carol had agreed to the arrangement at the time, but clearly the resentment had been building for decades, and now here we were, at my wedding, with everything exploded. I didn't know what to say to her. Part of me wanted to hug her, tell her it was okay, that she was still my mum, but another part of me felt betrayed, angry that I'd gone my whole life not knowing the truth. I told her I needed time. She nodded, crying, and walked away. Mark and I left the reception early. Our wedding night was spent in a hotel room with me crying, while he held me and tried to make sense of what had just happened. The fallout was messy. Half the guests didn't know what to do. Some people left right after Carol's speech. Others stayed and pretended nothing had happened, which was almost worse. My dad, Jane's husband, was furious. He'd known the truth but thought it was buried. He and Carol got into a screaming match in the parking lot. The whole thing was a disaster. I didn't talk to Jane for a month. I needed space to process. I was angry, confused, grieving the version of my life I thought I had. Mark was incredible through it all, patient and supportive, never pushing me to forgive or move on before I was ready. Eventually, I reached out to Jane. We met for coffee and talked for hours. She explained everything, answered every question I had, apologized over and over. She said she understood if I couldn't forgive her. But the thing is, she raised me. She was the one who stayed up with me when I was sick, who helped me with homework, who taught me to drive. Biology didn't change that. Carol might have given birth to me, but Jane was my mother in every way that mattered. So I forgave her. It took time and therapy, lots of therapy, but we got there. Carol, on the other hand, I cut off completely. What she did wasn't about telling me the truth. It was about causing maximum damage, hurting Jane, humiliating me on what was supposed to be the happiest day of my life. She didn't care about my well-being or my right to know. She cared about revenge. I sent her a message saying I wanted no contact, and I blocked her everywhere. I haven't spoken to her since. Mark and I are doing well. The wedding might have been a disaster, but our marriage is strong. We joke sometimes about having a do-over ceremony, just the two of us, somewhere quiet. We actually eloped to a beach in Mexico a year later and had a private ceremony with just an officiant and a photographer. That's the wedding I remember now, not the other one. I'm still in therapy, working through the identity stuff, the feelings of betrayal, the complicated grief of losing the version of my family I thought I had. Some days are harder than others, but I have Mark, I have Jane, and I have the truth now, even if it came in the worst possible way. Speaking of family bombshells, let me tell you about the time an entire secret family showed up uninvited. My mum spent 35 years teaching elementary school, 35 years of shaping young minds, dealing with difficult parents, grading papers at the kitchen table until midnight. She loved her job, but by the time retirement rolled around, she was ready. We'd been planning her retirement party for months. She wanted something big, something memorable, a celebration of all those years of hard work. So we organized this massive backyard party at my parents' house. 80 guests, catered food, a slideshow of photos from her career, speeches from former colleagues and students. It was going to be perfect. My dad, Tom, had been married to my mum for 40 years. They were high school sweethearts, the kind of couple everyone pointed to as relationship goals. He'd supported her through her entire teaching career, always showing up to school events, helping her set up her classroom every August, bragging about her to anyone who'd listen. They seemed solid, unshakable. My sister and I grew up watching them be disgustingly in love, finishing each other's sentences, holding hands at the movies even after decades together. The party was everything we'd hoped for. The weather was perfect, sunny but not too hot. The backyard looked amazing, decorated with streamers and balloons in my mum's favorite colors. Guests started arriving around 2, and by 3 the place was packed. Former students, now adults with kids of their own, came to thank my mum for changing their lives. Colleagues shared stories about her patience and creativity in the classroom. My mum was glowing, soaking it all in, holding my dad's hand while people toasted to her incredible career. I was in the middle of setting out more appetizers when I heard the music stop. Not fade out naturally, but stop abruptly like someone had yanked the plug. I looked up and saw people turning toward the driveway, confused expressions on their faces. A car had pulled up, a silver SUV I didn't recognize. The driver's side door opened and a woman stepped out. She looked to be in her early 40s, blonde hair, dressed nicely but casually. Then the back doors opened and 3 teenagers emerged. 2 boys and a girl, maybe ranging from 15 to 19. The woman walked straight through the gate into our backyard like she'd been invited. 80 people watched her approach, the entire party falling silent. She walked right up to where my parents were standing and said, loud enough for everyone to hear, "I'm Michelle, Tom's wife. These are his children." I thought I'd misheard her. Tom's wife? That was my mum. But then I looked at my dad's face and watched all the color drain out of it. He looked like he was about to pass out. My mum just stared at the woman, processing the words, her hand slowly slipping out of my dad's grip. The teenagers stood there looking uncomfortable, clearly not wanting to be there, but also defiant, like they had every right to crash this party. Michelle kept talking. She said she'd been married to my dad for 22 years. 22 years. She lived in the next state over with their 3 kids. She said my dad split his time between families, telling her he traveled for work, telling us he had business obligations. The business trips we'd grown up with, the conferences and client meetings, they were all lies. He was living an entire second life 3 hours away. The crowd was frozen. Someone's phone was recording. My mum's face had gone from confused to devastated to furious in the span of about 30 seconds. My sister grabbed my arm so hard I'd have bruises later. And my dad just stood there, silent, unable to deny it because both of his families were staring at him. But that wasn't even the worst part. Michelle said she'd only found out about my mum a few weeks ago. My dad had updated his will and she'd seen it by accident. Saw my mum's name listed. Saw our names listed. Saw assets she didn't know existed. A house she didn't know he owned. Retirement savings she'd never heard about. She'd confronted him, he'd admitted everything, and now she was here to claim what she said was rightfully hers and her children's. She said she wanted half of everything. The house, the retirement accounts, the savings, all of it. She said her kids deserved their share of their father's assets. One of the teenagers, the oldest boy, spoke up. He said they'd been lied to their entire lives too. That they thought their dad was a traveling salesman who was on the road a lot but always came home. That they'd had family dinners and vacations and a seemingly normal life, except their dad was gone half the time. He said they deserved compensation for the deception, for growing up with a part-time father who was pretending to be full-time. My mum finally found her voice. She said, "Get out." Quietly at first, then louder. "Get out of my house." She turned to my dad. "You too, get out." My dad tried to speak, reaching for her arm, but she jerked away like he'd burned her. She said she wanted him gone, that she didn't want to hear his excuses, that she didn't want to see his face. She looked at Michelle and said, "Take him, he's all yours." Michelle looked triumphant, like she'd won something, but the teenagers looked miserable. The middle kid, the girl, was crying. The youngest boy looked angry. The oldest just looked tired, like he'd been dealing with this mess longer than anyone knew. My sister and I were frozen, trying to process that we apparently had 3 half-siblings we'd never known about, standing in our backyard demanding money at our mum's retirement party. The guests started leaving quickly after that. People grabbed their things and slipped out without saying goodbye, clearly uncomfortable and desperate to escape the drama. A few of my mum's close friends stayed, surrounding her protectively, glaring at my dad and Michelle. My dad tried to talk to my mum, to us, to anyone who'd listen, but no one would engage. He kept saying he could explain, that it was complicated, that he'd never meant to hurt anyone. Classic lines from someone caught in the worst possible way. Michelle demanded to come inside and discuss logistics. My mum's best friend physically blocked the door and told her to get a lawyer if she wanted anything, because she wasn't welcome in this house. Michelle threatened to call the police, said she had rights as my dad's legal wife, except my mom was also his legal wife, which meant my dad was a bigamist, which meant he'd committed a crime. That realization hit everyone at the same time. Michelle's face went pale. My dad looked like he might throw up. My sister started laughing, this hysterical, disbelieving laugh that made everyone turn to look at her. She said, "You didn't just cheat, you committed an actual felony. You're so screwed." Things went from bad to unhinged. My mom called her lawyer right there, on speakerphone, in front of everyone, explained the situation. The lawyer said not to let anyone take anything from the house, not to sign anything, and that she'd start filing paperwork immediately to freeze all of my dad's assets. My mum also called the police and reported the bigamy. 2 officers showed up 20 minutes later, took statements from everyone, and told my dad he'd likely be hearing from the district attorney soon. Michelle and her kids left after that, realizing they weren't going to get what they came for. But not before the oldest kid looked at me and my sister and said, "This isn't our fault. We didn't know about you either." Which was fair. None of this was those kids' fault. They were victims of my dad's lies, just like we were. My dad tried to stay, tried to talk to my mum, but she had him escorted off the property by the police. They didn't arrest him, but they made it clear he needed to leave and let the lawyers handle everything. He left in his car, alone, and I remember watching him drive away thinking I didn't know who that man was. The dad I thought I knew didn't exist. He'd been a character, a role my dad played when he was with us. The aftermath was brutal. My mum hired a top divorce lawyer who tore into my dad's finances. They found 2 decades of deception. Separate bank accounts, credit cards in different names, rent payments for Michelle's house, tuition payments for the other kids. My dad had been financially supporting 2 complete households for over 20 years. The amount of money he'd spent maintaining this double life was staggering. DNA tests were ordered to confirm paternity of Michelle's kids. They came back positive for all three. So my dad definitely had three other children he'd been hiding from us our entire lives. Michelle also got a lawyer, and for a while there was this messy, three-way legal battle between my mum, Michelle, and my dad, all fighting over assets and trying to figure out who was legally entitled to what. The bigamy charge was dropped eventually because it turned out my dad had never actually married Michelle. They'd had a ceremony, exchanged vows. She'd taken his last name, but he'd never filed the paperwork. So legally, he was only married to my mum, which meant Michelle had even less ground to stand on legally. But it also meant her kids were born out of wedlock and she'd been living a lie even bigger than she'd realized. The divorce took almost 2 years to finalize. My mum got the house, the majority of the retirement savings, and a hefty alimony payment. My dad's reputation was destroyed. People in our community found out, and he became the guy who'd led a double life for 2 decades. He lost friendships, professional connections, respect from everyone who'd known him. My sister and I cut him off completely. We tried having a conversation with him once, asked him how he could do this, how he could look us in the eye for years while living this massive lie. He didn't have good answers. He said it started as an affair, that he'd fallen in love with Michelle but couldn't leave my mum, so he tried to have both. He said it spiraled and he didn't know how to stop it. He said he loved both families, which just made it worse, like we were some kind of timeshare situation. We haven't spoken to him in 3 years. He's reached out, sent letters and emails trying to explain, trying to apologize, trying to have a relationship with us. We don't respond. As far as my sister and I are concerned, our dad died the day Michelle showed up at that retirement party. Michelle and her kids tried to reach out once too through social media. The oldest kid sent me a message saying he wished things were different, that he'd always wanted siblings and hated that we met this way. I appreciated the sentiment, but I wasn't ready to have a relationship with them. Maybe someday, but not now. My mum is thriving, honestly. She took the retirement she'd earned and traveled, spent time with friends, started volunteering. She said the divorce was the best thing that ever happened to her because it freed her from a man who never deserved her loyalty. She's bitter sometimes, sure, but mostly she's just relieved. Relieved to know the truth, relieved to be free, relieved to be surrounded by people who actually care about her. The retirement party that was supposed to celebrate her career ended up being the party where her marriage exploded. But she says it was fitting, in a way. She spent 35 years teaching people to value honesty and integrity, and her own husband had neither. At least now she knows. Family impersonation takes many forms, but what happens when your own twin becomes your worst enemy? Noah proposed to me on a beach at sunset, the most cliché romantic thing imaginable, and I loved every second of it. We'd been together for 3 years, and getting engaged felt like the natural next step. We set a date 6 months out, started planning, and I was happier than I'd ever been. My identical twin sister Lily was there when I told the family, and she hugged me and said all the right things, but I caught the look in her eyes. It was the same look she'd had our entire lives whenever something good happened to me. Envy mixed with resentment, hidden behind a forced smile. Lily and I had always been competitive. Identical twins often are, I think, especially when people constantly compare you. Growing up, if I got an A, she needed an A+. If I made the soccer team, she needed to be captain. If I dated someone, she'd flirt with them just to prove she could. It was exhausting, but I'd learned to navigate it over the years. I kept my relationship with Noah somewhat separate from family stuff, which helped. He'd met Lily a handful of times at holidays and family dinners, but they weren't close. That distance felt safer. Then, about a month before my business trip, Lily's long-term boyfriend dumped her. They'd been together for 5 years, and she'd been planning her own engagement, dropping hints constantly, showing him ring styles. When he ended it, she was devastated. I tried to be supportive, but she shut me out. She'd make comments about how I didn't understand what it was like to lose someone, how I had everything figured out while her life was falling apart. I felt bad for her genuinely, but I also felt her bitterness growing sharper with every conversation. 2 months before the wedding, my company sent me on a business trip. 2 weeks in Seattle for a major client project. I didn't want to go, but it was non-negotiable. Noah understood. He'd stay home, keep working on wedding planning, and we'd FaceTime every night. It was only 2 weeks. What could possibly go wrong? Lily started showing up places Noah frequented during that first week. She'd go to his gym, his favorite coffee shop, the bar where he met his friends on Thursday nights. At first, Noah didn't think much of it. He'd text me saying he ran into Lily, that she seemed lonely and they'd grabbed coffee. I thought it was sweet that she was reaching out, that maybe she was trying to be closer to Noah now that he was going to be family. I encouraged him to be kind to her. I had no idea what she was actually doing. She'd changed her hairstyle to match mine exactly. We were identical already, but I wore my hair in loose waves with a side part, and Lily usually wore hers straight with a middle part. She switched. She also started wearing my perfume, the one Noah bought me for my birthday. And then she started pretending to be me. She'd show up at Noah's apartment when his friends were there, pretending she'd gotten back early from Seattle. She'd make comments about having doubts about the wedding, about feeling like maybe we were rushing things. She'd mention a coworker named David, imply there was something happening between us. Noah's friends would tell him later, concerned, asking if everything was okay with us. Noah would call me, confused, saying people were telling him I was acting strange, that I'd been at his place when I was clearly in Seattle. I thought people were mixing us up. Lily and I looked identical after all. I figured she was visiting Noah, and people were assuming she was me. I asked Noah if Lily had been coming around. He said yes, a few times, but she always said she was checking in on him while I was away. I told him that was nice of her, that I appreciated her looking out for him. I still didn't get it. Then came the breaking point. Lily went to Noah's apartment one night, a week into my trip, pretending to be me. She told him she'd flown home early to surprise him. She was wearing my perfume, my hairstyle, even some of my clothes that she must have taken from my apartment. Noah let her in, confused about why I hadn't told him I was coming home, but happy to see me, or who he thought was me. She kissed him. She initiated it, pressing herself against him, trying to take things further. And Noah, for a few seconds, kissed back because he thought it was me. But then something felt off. The way she kissed was different. The way she touched him was different. She made a comment about the apartment that didn't make sense, referenced something I wouldn't know. Noah pulled back, studying her face, and asked if she was okay. Lily tried to keep going, told him she missed him, tried to lead him toward the bedroom. But Noah's instincts were screaming at him that something was wrong. He stepped back and said, "Prove you're Emma." She laughed it off, said he was being paranoid, so he pulled out his phone and called me on FaceTime. I answered from my hotel room in Seattle, in my pajamas, clearly 2,000 miles away. Noah's face appeared on the screen, pale and confused, and then he flipped the camera. Lily was standing there, frozen, caught. We locked eyes through the phone. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't process what I was seeing. My twin sister in my fiancé's apartment, wearing my clothes, having just kissed my fiancé while pretending to be me. Noah was saying something, his voice shaking, asking what was happening. Lily tried to run, but Noah blocked the door. He kept the camera on her, kept me on the line, and demanded she explain. She started crying, these manipulative tears she'd perfected over the years. She said she just wanted to feel close to someone, that she missed being loved, that she didn't mean anything by it. Noah told her to get out. She tried to hug him, still pretending to be distraught, but he physically moved her aside and opened the door. She left, and Noah sat down on his couch, still holding the phone so I could see him. He looked destroyed. He said he was so sorry, that he'd kissed her back for a second before realizing that he felt sick. I told him it wasn't his fault. I told him I was coming home immediately. I booked a flight that night, a red-eye that would get me back by morning. The flight was the longest 6 hours of my life. I couldn't stop replaying what I'd seen. My sister, my twin, the person who was supposed to be my other half, had tried to seduce my fiancé, had been systematically sabotaging my relationship for weeks, had lied to Noah's friends, planted seeds of doubt, worn my identity like a costume to destroy my happiness. And for what? Because she was jealous? Because her own relationship had ended? I went straight to Lily's apartment from the airport. I pounded on her door until she opened it. She looked rough, like she hadn't slept. I didn't give her a chance to speak. I asked her how long she'd been planning this. She tried to deny it at first, said it was a misunderstanding, that she'd just been trying to help keep Noah company. I told her I saw the footage, that Noah recorded everything after the FaceTime call. I told her I knew about the lies she'd been spreading to his friends, about her pretending to be me. She finally broke. She admitted all of it, said she'd been planning it since I left for Seattle, that she saw an opportunity and took it. She said watching me be happy while her life fell apart was unbearable. She said she wanted to ruin my engagement, to prove that Noah couldn't even tell us apart, to make me feel as miserable as she felt. She said if she couldn't have happiness, why should I? The cruelty in her voice was something I'd never heard before. This wasn't just sibling rivalry, this was deep, calculated malice. I told her I was done. Done with her jealousy, done with her toxicity, done with pretending we had a normal sister relationship. I said I never wanted to see her again. She tried to backtrack, said she didn't mean it, that she was just hurting and made a mistake. I told her a mistake is forgetting someone's birthday. What she did was a deliberate campaign to destroy my life. I left her apartment and blocked her number immediately. I called my parents and told them everything. Sent them the footage, the timeline, screenshots of messages from Noah's friends mentioning Emma's strange behavior during my trip. My parents were horrified. My mom cried. My dad said he'd always known Lily had jealousy issues, but never thought she'd go this far. They confronted her, and she tried to paint herself as the victim, said I was overreacting, but the evidence was overwhelming. They sided with me, told Lily she needed serious therapy, and made it clear she wasn't welcome at family events if I was there. Noah and I went to couples therapy. Even though we hadn't done anything wrong, the whole situation had shaken our trust. Not in each other, but in our ability to protect our relationship from outside chaos. The therapist helped us process the betrayal, set boundaries, and rebuild our foundation. It took months, but we came out stronger. We postponed the wedding by 4 months. I needed time to heal, to separate my identity from my twins, to feel secure again. When we did get married, it was beautiful and drama-free. Lily wasn't invited. Half the family supported that decision. The other half thought I was being harsh. I didn't care. It was my wedding, and I wasn't going to spend the day worried about what she might do. I haven't spoken to Lily in 2 years. She's tried reaching out through mutual friends, through social media, even through my parents. I ignore it all. Some people say I should forgive her, that she's family, that twins are supposed to be close. But what she did wasn't a lapse in judgment. It was a deliberate, cruel attempt to destroy my happiness because she couldn't handle her own pain. That's not someone I want in my life, twin or not. Noah and I are doing great. We're talking about buying a house, maybe starting a family in the next year or 2. I've learned to set boundaries with toxic people, even when they share your DNA. And I've learned that being identical doesn't mean you're the same person. Lily and I might look alike, but we're nothing alike where it counts. Twins might share DNA, but inheritance battles? Those can tear any family apart, especially when secrets lurk beneath. My sister Kate and I had been competing our entire lives. Who got better grades, who was prettier, who mom and dad loved more, all the usual sibling rivalry garbage. But it got worse as we got older. She went to a better college, I got a better job. She married first, I made more money. It was exhausting, this constant scorekeeping, but neither of us knew how to stop. And then our grandma got sick. Grandma was the matriarch of our family, the person who held everyone together. She had money, old family money that she'd managed carefully for decades. Everyone knew she'd eventually leave an inheritance, but no one talked about it while she was alive. That felt too morbid, too opportunistic. But when she was diagnosed with stage 4 cancer and given 6 months to live, things changed. Kate and I both started visiting more, calling more, being more present. And I'm ashamed to admit it now, but part of my motivation wasn't just love, it was money. Grandma's will left her estate split evenly between Kate and me, $400,000 each. It was life-changing money, the kind that could pay off a mortgage, fund a business, set someone up for years. But I wanted more. I wanted to be the favorite, the one Grandma thought of first, so I did something unforgivable. I faked a pregnancy. I started dropping hints to Grandma that I was trying to conceive, that I'd always wanted kids but was having trouble. She was sympathetic, said she'd pray for me. Then, about 2 months before she died, I told her I was pregnant. I bought a fake pregnancy belly online, wore it under loose clothes when I visited her. I sent her ultrasound photos I'd found on Google. I talked about baby names, nursery colors, how excited I was to finally be a mum. Grandma was overjoyed. She said she'd been praying for this, that she couldn't wait to meet her great-grandchild. Looking back, I don't even recognize the person who did that. The desperation, the manipulation, it's horrifying, but at the time I convinced myself it was harmless. Grandma was dying anyway. This made her happy in her final months, and maybe, just maybe, she'd leave me a bigger share of the inheritance because I was giving her a great-grandchild. It was calculated and disgusting, and I knew it even then. Grandma passed away 3 months later. The funeral was scheduled for 2 weeks after her death, giving family time to travel. In the meantime, the will went into probate. Kate was named executor, which made sense. She was the older sister, more organized, better with paperwork. I figured the money would be distributed within a few months, and I'd quietly miscarry after getting my share. No one would be the wiser. But months went by and nothing happened. I'd ask Kate about the estate, when we'd get our inheritance, and she'd give vague answers. She'd say the lawyers were slow, that there were complications with taxes, that these things take time. I believed her at first. Probate can be messy, but after 6 months with no updates, I started getting suspicious. I decided to check the estate records myself. They're public in our state, so I went to the courthouse and requested copies. What I found made my blood run cold. Kate had transferred my entire share of the inheritance to herself. $400,000 gone. The paperwork showed I'd signed a waiver, a document saying I was voluntarily giving up my inheritance. Except I'd never signed anything. The signature was forged, a decent copy of my handwriting, but not quite right. Kate had stolen from me. I confronted her immediately, called her phone about 50 times until she answered. I said I knew what she'd done, that I had proof, that I was going to the police. She laughed. Actually laughed. She said good luck proving it, that she was the executor and had all the legal power, that no one would believe me over her. She said if I made trouble, she'd make sure the family knew what kind of person I really was. I asked what she meant. She said, I know about the pregnancy, or should I say the fake pregnancy. My stomach dropped. She knew. I asked how. She said she'd seen the fake belly in my car once when I gave her a ride, tucked under the seat. She'd put it together, realized I'd been manipulating Grandma. She said she had photos, evidence, everything she needed to destroy my reputation if I tried to expose her theft. It was mutually assured destruction. If I reported her for stealing, she'd expose my lie. We'd both go down. I spent the next week trying to figure out what to do. I couldn't let her get away with stealing $400,000 from me. But I also couldn't let the family find out about the fake pregnancy. The shame, the judgment, it would be unbearable. I decided to expose her at Grandma's funeral. I'd stand up during the service and tell everyone what she'd done, show them the forged documents, force her to return the money. It was risky, but I didn't see another option. The funeral arrived. It was a big service, over 100 people, extended family, friends, people from Grandma's church. Kate and I were both asked to give eulogies. I planned to use my time at the microphone to expose her, to lay out the evidence in front of everyone. But Kate went first, and here's where it gets absurd. She started her eulogy normally, talking about Grandma's kindness and generosity. Then her tone shifted. She said Grandma had been deceived in her final months by someone she trusted. She said she needed to tell the truth, even though it was painful, because Grandma deserved honesty. Then she looked right at me and said, my sister faked a pregnancy to manipulate our dying grandmother. The room went silent. Kate pulled out her phone and showed photos on the screen behind her, projected for everyone to see. Pictures of me wearing the fake belly, screenshots of the ultrasound images I'd sent Grandma, with the original sources from Google circled, a timeline showing dates that proved the pregnancy was impossible. She'd done her research, built an airtight case, and now she was destroying me in front of our entire family. People started murmuring, gasping, looking at me with disgust. I wanted to disappear. I wanted the floor to swallow me whole. Kate kept talking. She said I'd manipulated Grandma for money, that I'd lied about carrying her great-grandchild just to get a bigger inheritance. She said it was the cruelest thing she'd ever witnessed. Then she dropped the second bomb. She admitted she'd stolen my inheritance. She said it right there, in front of everyone. I took her share of the estate, every penny, because she didn't deserve it. Someone who would fake a pregnancy to manipulate a dying woman doesn't deserve anything. The room erupted. People were shouting, crying, demanding explanations. My parents looked horrified, split between their two daughters who'd both turned out to be frauds. Other relatives were yelling at Kate for stealing, at me for lying, at both of us for disrespecting Grandma's memory. It was chaos. I ran out of the funeral, got in my car, and drove home sobbing. The legal fallout was immediate. My parents hired a lawyer to sort out the estate. The forged documents were obvious under scrutiny, and Kate couldn't defend them. She was forced to return my $400,000 plus interest and legal fees. She was also charged with forgery and theft. The DA decided to prosecute because of the amount involved and the violation of her fiduciary duty as executor. She pleaded guilty and got probation, a hefty fine, and a criminal record. But I didn't escape unscathed. The family shunned me for the fake pregnancy. My parents said they were ashamed of me, that they didn't know how to process what I'd done. Extended relatives stopped inviting me to gatherings. People I'd known my whole life looked at me with disgust when they saw me in public. The lie had been exposed in the most public, humiliating way possible, and there was no coming back from it. Kate and I haven't spoken since the funeral. We're both estranged from the family, two black sheep who destroyed their own reputations in a mutual takedown. I heard through the grapevine that she moved to a different state, trying to start fresh. I did the same. I used part of the inheritance to relocate across the country, somewhere no one knows me or my history. I'm in therapy now, unpacking why I thought faking a pregnancy was an acceptable thing to do. My therapist says it stemmed from deep insecurity and the need for validation, that my relationship with Kate was so toxic, it pushed me to extremes I wouldn't have considered otherwise. That's probably true, but it doesn't excuse what I did. I manipulated a dying woman for money. There's no justification for that. Sometimes I wonder if Kate planned the whole thing, if she knew I'd faked the pregnancy and saw an opportunity to steal the inheritance, knowing I couldn't fight back without exposing myself. Or maybe she stole first and then discovered my lie later, and we just ended up in this perfect storm of mutual destruction. Either way, we both lost. We both got what we deserved, I guess. The inheritance is sitting in an account, mostly untouched. It feels tainted, earned through deception and cruelty. I've started donating portions to charities Grandma supported, trying to do something good with money I never should have received in the first place. It doesn't erase what I did, but it's something. I don't talk to my family anymore. Kate doesn't either. We destroyed each other and took the family down with us. And all for what? Money, pride, the desperate need to win some imaginary competition? Looking back, it's almost laughable how stupid it all was. Almost. When deception meets desperation in the workplace, sometimes the only option is to fight fire with evidence. I'd been working as an accountant at our company's regional office for about 4 years when I started noticing the discrepancies. Nothing major at first, just small irregularities in the monthly financial reports. A few $100s here, 1,000 there, amounts that could easily be explained away as rounding errors or data entry mistakes. But I'd been doing this job long enough to know what normal looked like, and this wasn't it. Something felt off. My boss Greg was the kind of manager everyone hated but no one challenged. He'd been with the company for over a decade, had connections at corporate, and wielded his authority like a weapon. He micromanaged everything, took credit for the team's successes, and blamed us for any failures. If you produced a brilliant analysis, Greg presented it to upper management as his own work. If a project went sideways, suddenly it was your fault for not following his unclear directions. People quit regularly because of him, but he always survived. He was untouchable, or so everyone thought. I started noticing the financial issues about 6 months before everything blew up. I was reconciling accounts and kept finding payments to vendors I didn't recognize. When I looked them up, the company names seemed legitimate enough, but something about them nagged at me. The amounts were always just under the threshold that would trigger additional approval requirements. 10,000 here, 8,000 there. Spread across different accounts, different months, easy to miss if you weren't paying close attention. I did what any good accountant would do. I started digging. I pulled records going back 3 years, built spreadsheets tracking every suspicious transaction, and looked for patterns. What I found was damning. The vendor accounts were fake. The addresses listed were P.O. boxes or vacant buildings. The invoices were forged, professional-looking but completely fabricated, and all of them had been approved by Greg. I traced the money further and found it was being funneled through a shell company, then into a personal account. Greg's personal account. He'd been embezzling from the company for at least 3 years, maybe longer. The total I could document was over $300,000. He'd been stealing systematically, carefully, in amounts small enough to avoid immediate detection, but large enough to fund what I later learned was a very expensive lifestyle. The vacation home, the luxury car, the private school tuition for his kids, all of it paid for with stolen money. I spent weeks documenting everything. I made copies of invoices, bank statements, email approvals, everything that proved the fraud. I organized it into a detailed report with timelines, transaction histories, and clear evidence of Greg's involvement. I knew I needed to be thorough because Greg had powerful friends, and any accusation against him would need to be airtight. I was planning to take my findings to corporate headquarters the following week. I'd already drafted the email, attached all the evidence, and was just waiting for the right moment to send it. But Greg moved first. He called me into his office on a Friday afternoon and fired me, just like that. He said my performance had been declining, that I wasn't meeting expectations, that the company was making some cuts, and unfortunately I was being let go. Effective immediately. He had security escort me out of the building before I could even clean out my desk. They packed my personal items into a box and walked me to my car like I was some kind of criminal. I sat in my car in the parking lot, hands shaking, trying to process what had just happened. Had Greg figured out I was investigating him? Was this retaliation? Or was it just coincidence, terrible timing that he decided to fire me right before I could expose him? Either way, I was done playing nice. I drove home, opened my laptop, and sent the email to corporate. I addressed it to the CFO, the head of internal audit, and the general counsel. I attached every piece of evidence I'd compiled, bank statements showing the fraudulent payments, forged invoices with Greg's approval signatures, a detailed breakdown of the shell company and how it connected to Greg's personal accounts, a timeline spanning 3 years showing the pattern of theft. I explained that I'd been fired that afternoon, possibly in retaliation for discovering the fraud, and that I was providing this information as a whistleblower acting in the company's best interest. I hit send at 8 p.m. on Friday night. Then I poured myself a very large glass of wine and waited. By Monday morning, everything had exploded. Corporate launched an immediate investigation. They sent a team of auditors and lawyers to the regional office first thing. Greg's computer was seized, his office was locked down, his access to company accounts was frozen. I got a call from the general counsel asking me to come in for an interview, and I spent 4 hours walking them through every piece of evidence, explaining how I'd discovered the fraud and documenting Greg's pattern of behavior. The investigation moved fast. Within 3 days, they'd verified everything I'd reported and found even more irregularities I'd missed. Greg had apparently been embezzling for closer to 5 years, not 3, and the total was actually north of $400,000. They froze his personal assets, seized his bank accounts, and placed him on immediate leave pending criminal charges. That's when Greg called me. I was at home, still technically unemployed, when my phone rang. Unknown number. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. It was Greg. His voice was desperate, panicked, nothing like the arrogant boss I'd known. He said we needed to talk, that there had been a misunderstanding, that maybe we could work something out. He said he'd made some mistakes, but nothing criminal, just accounting errors. He offered to pay me $50,000 if I'd recant my statement, say I'd misunderstood the transactions, help him make this go away. I almost laughed. The audacity of this man, calling me after firing me, after stealing from the company for years, thinking he could buy his way out of consequences. I told him I wasn't interested. He started begging, his voice cracking. He said he'd lose everything, his house, his family, his freedom. He said he'd made mistakes, but he had kids to think about. I told him he should have thought about that before committing fraud for half a decade. Then I hung up. I reported the bribery attempt to the company's lawyers immediately. They added it to the growing list of charges against Greg. Attempted obstruction of justice, witness tampering, the hits just kept coming. His desperation was digging him deeper, and I had zero sympathy. He'd built his comfortable life on theft and treated his employees like garbage. Now he was facing the consequences, and no amount of begging would change that. The criminal charges came fast. The district attorney was eager to prosecute, probably because the amount was substantial and the evidence was overwhelming. Greg was arrested at his home. Perp walked in front of his neighbors. The whole humiliating ordeal. He tried to fight it at first, hired an expensive lawyer, claimed he was being set up. But the evidence was irrefutable. Bank records, forged documents, email trails, testimony from multiple witnesses, including me. His lawyer eventually advised him to take a plea deal. Greg pleaded guilty to embezzlement and fraud. He was sentenced to 7 years in federal prison and ordered to repay the full amount stolen, plus penalties and interest. The restitution order was for over $500,000 after you factored in legal costs and damages. His assets were liquidated, his house sold, his retirement accounts drained. His wife filed for divorce before he even started his sentence. The life he'd built on stolen money crumbled completely. Meanwhile, corporate called me back in. They apologized for my termination, said it was clearly retaliatory and wrongful. They offered me Greg's job, regional accounting manager, significant pay increase, full benefits, and a whistleblower bonus of $75,000. I negotiated for even better terms, asked for a retention bonus, additional vacation time, and a formal letter clearing my record of the termination. They agreed to everything. I started the following month. The office culture changed dramatically once Greg was gone. People were happier, more collaborative, actually willing to share ideas without fear of them being stolen. Productivity went up, turnover dropped, morale improved across the board. Turns out when you remove a toxic leader, the entire environment gets better. Who knew? I ran into one of Greg's former friends from corporate about a year later. He said Greg was miserable in prison, that he'd aged a decade in 12 months, that he spent his days in the prison library trying to file appeals that went nowhere. The friend seemed to expect me to feel bad about it. I didn't. Greg made his choices. He stole from the company, treated people terribly, and when he got caught, he tried to bribe his way out. He earned every second of that prison sentence. I still work at the company, still in the role I took over from Greg. I've built a good team, treat people with respect, and run a clean, ethical operation. And every time I approve an invoice or review financial statements, I think about how close Greg came to getting away with it. If I hadn't been paying attention, if I hadn't taken the time to investigate, he might still be stealing. But I did pay attention. I did investigate, and I made sure he faced consequences. Justice doesn't always win, but sometimes when you have the receipts and the courage to use them, it does. And there you have it, 12 stories of betrayal, revenge, and justice served cold. If you've made it this far through all this chaos, you're definitely part of the night crew now. These stories remind us that truth has a funny way of surfacing, no matter how deep people try to bury it. Sweet dreams, everyone, and remember, karma doesn't need an address. It always finds its way home. Hit that subscribe button if you want more Reddit drama tomorrow night, and tell me in the comments which story shocked you the most. Until next time, sleep tight and maybe double check those nanny cams.